I'm Ethan Mollick, a professor at Wharton and accidental AI expert, especially thinking about how it impacts entrepreneurship and education. And I am not a robot.
Ethan, I think both Henrik and I have been following you for years, long before the advent, certainly of ChatGPT. In your kind of innovation related posts, we sent each other different of your research synthesis over the years. One thing I was really curious about is, are you aware of the transition to more focus on AI as it's happening, or is it only something that kind of happened for you in retrospect?
I have been playing with it for a long time. When I was doing business simulations and things like that, I was thinking about how to use AI for teaching. I was at the Media Lab. I worked with Marvin Minsky, who's like one of the founding fathers of AI. But
Legend.
I was never the technical person. I was always sort of the explain to other people how do we use it person. So I think I was in a very weird circumstance, which is the only people who thought AI was going to be real were computer scientists and like me. And that problem is now everyone which is wants to talk to computer scientists and they don't have any sense of how business stuff works, right? And they're very happy to pontificate on stage at Davos or whatever, but like they're not building stuff for work; they're just doing stuff.
Was there was there any sense for you that you were shifting as far as your audience's expectations? I mean, to me, once you build a big following on Twitter and you had an enormous following that's reading any of your synthesis about all sorts of, I mean, a huge array of topics. As you start kind of focusing more and more on AI, were you getting good feedback from your audience? Did you feel like self-conscious of the fact that now I'm not kind of covering as much ground, or how'd you think about that?
I've always kind of just been me. I'm an academic because I just like to tell people stuff. Like I'm the ultimate well actually guy. And like this is like so I find something interests me and I post it, and that's always been the way it was. So when it was general purpose, I was reading literature in our field because it was interesting and posting about it. When AI stuff came out, I found the change was that I was the only person experimenting, which was this kind of terrifying moment of like, oh wait, nobody's actually testing anything. Still when I go to a conference and that people want to do like a conversation about AI, I find that much less useful than just showing people how this stuff works because I think a lot of people haven't really encountered it. So I found myself on the experimenting edge and that there wasn't anyone in this role. So at some point you overcome imposter syndrome and you're just like, I guess I'm the guy now. I don't really have a marketing plan or anything else. I'm an academic, right? So like every so often I'm like, oh, I should figure out a way to make more money from this.
I mean, like, we definitely have many people that appreciate it. So, if nothing else, it doesn't come from money, but a lot of thank yous for sure. One thing that you've mentioned a few times, which I think is mind blowing, is how incredible the technology is already and how usable it is for a lot of people. And though how still a lot of people, seem to be a little bit afraid of it or doesn't really seem to want to engage. What's your thesis on why that might be?
So I think there's a few reasons. One is I think that the as they would say, the affordances of this sort of approach are terrible. It's built like a chatbot, but like how are you supposed to use a chatbot to write a serious essay, right? Or do coding? It's very weird, right? So I think it's hard for people to get. They're also set up for Google, like they think about Google. So the first thing they always do is they sort of try and do a Google search with the AI and then it hallucinates something. And by the way, they tend to use the free version, which hallucinates a lot, as opposed to one of the, GPT-4 class model. So they end up with an hallucination. Then they usually ask it for some sort of like, what will AI do to my job in the future? And they get a super boring answer because that's all been reinforcement learning through human feedback out of the system to not say anything interesting or scary. And it's not good at prediction anyway, in that kind of way. Then they might ask it about a field they know really well or their bio, and they get more hallucinations. They're kind of like, this is ridiculous, and they walk away. Alternately, they find out how powerful it is right away, and they get freaked out, and they're like, I'm just not going to touch this again. This is weird. So it's a pretty weird system for onboarding yourself with.
If you want to tip somebody towards the end of the spectrum of finding out the power of the technology rather than dismissing it, can you talk for a second about, are there simple tactics or activities that you have discovered that help people just get glimpses of potential rather than trigger? Because I think there's almost a human desire to dismiss. Oh, it's not actually that good, right? So how do you help somebody go, oh, wait, maybe I should take this seriously?
So there's a bunch of fun things you can do, but I think the most useful thing and advice I give everybody at this point, the first principle of my book is use it for everything you can. Like you just need to bite the bullet and say like, look, I'm learning a new piece. Like I use my iPhone a lot. I use my like the only way to do it is use it for tasks you do. So that means like everyone does like bedtime stories for their kids and stuff or wedding toast, which is pretty funny because those are some of the most intimate stuff. And that's like people give that up right away because they're scared of being creative, right? So they give that stuff up right away. but it's about taking to your job and like everything you legally and ethically can. You need ideas for something, do that. You want to talk through a meeting in advance, great. You want to write the marketing copy for you, terrific. You want to summarize meeting results, do that. You wanted to write a piece of code for you, fine. Like give you strategic advice, read this document, summarize it. It won't work for everything, but the only way to learn is to do it. And the only way to be impressed by it is to use it enough. And the other important thing, of course, is you have to use one of the 3 GPT-4 class models or you're going to be very disappointed. That's a huge problem too.
Yeah, I was going to say, would you talk about that? About you posted recently to Twitter your observation about folks' usage of GPT 3.5 versus 4. It actually prompted me to say, I was in a meeting the other day and someone started, we're very serious meeting where we're talking about leveraging AI in the business, et cetera. And someone said, oh, let me share my screen. And they pulled it up and it said GPT 3.5 in the corner. And I just stopped them and I said, respectfully, friends don't let friends use GPT 3.5, but it was in part inspired by your post. Would you talk about what are you seeing and why do you think it's so important to be using frontier models?
I mean, so the easy part on the frontier model side is there's a scaling law, right? And the smarter your model is, the larger it is, the more expensive it is to build. And they're just much smarter. I mean, my rough equivalent is you could consider GPT 3.5 to be sort of a high school sophomore and GPT-4 to be more like a first year freshman PhD student in most cases, in terms of both test scores and everything else we evaluate on. And the thing is, there are reasons why companies may want to use a lower end model because it's faster to do inference, it's cheaper. There's a bunch of little advantages. We can talk more about that. I don't think those are long-term advantages, but if you're using this personally for yourself, you need to be using the most advanced model. My favorite illustration, Bloomberg spent $10 million plus training Bloomberg GPT, on all of their ultimate Bloomberg data. It's designed to do stock trading. It's designed, like all of this amazing stuff. And it was pretty good. They did some experiments. GPT-4 beats it on every characteristic out of the box, even though it's not supposed to do stock trading. GPT-4 beats GPT 3.5 on medical advice. Sorry, on the specialized GPT 3.5 class medical AIs on medical advice and most doctors. Like it's just a better model. And if you want to figure out what it can do, you need to use a smarter model to work with. Like if you wouldn't delegate it to a high school sophomore, you should delegate it to GPT 3.5 when you have 4 available. So it's kind of an ironclad law. Now, we don't know how long this will last, right? Right now, there are 3 of the models in this class, and you can pick which one you want, and people have strong views about them. And it's depending on your industry, by the way. Like, there's a huge difference between using it for coding and using it for education.
You had another post the other day, which I also very much enjoyed, called something like detecting the secret cyborgs, something like that. And I thought it was fascinating on many levels, but could you talk a little bit about how you see people using AI successfully in companies?
One of the things I talk to CEOs all the time at this point and high level executives, and none of them are using AI, right? And they've all delegated to a committee that will be reporting back to them in the next 3 months, which will then start a process of looking for an RFP to hire a consultant who will then do an initial analysis. And by the way, the consultants don't know anything. Nobody knows anything. I talk to all the AI companies. There is no instruction manual out there. There is no secret. Everybody who's telling you they know how stuff is making it up. It's very funny. Every so often I find myself online referred to as a futurist. I think I'm a presentist plus 2 months right now. Like I have no idea what's going to happen, but I've got like
That's
2 months.
great.
And so there isn't anyone who can help you, right? So while the CEOs are, trying to figure out how to do centralized control and everything they always do, everybody else is just using AI. I spoke to someone who wrote the policy to ban ChatGPT use at a major bank, and she used ChatGPT to do that, and emailed it to herself. Like it's like asking you to go into work and then use, write everything out by hand and not use calculators, right? Like you're just not going to do it because it sucks. And even better, if people don't know you're using it, you get a huge advantage. The problem though then is that no one wants to tell you they're using it because company policies are super vague, right? And they're not clear about what you might get fired for doing it, right? You might get lack of credit. Oh, you were a wizard. Now you're not a wizard anymore, right? You're like, I don't trust your work anymore. They might realize how little work you're doing, which could result in you layoffs, being fired, or you being assigned more work. And there's no advantage to doing it. So everyone just keeps it secret.
So can we talk about kind of normalizing AI use for a second? I was in another meeting that just was an incredible experience for me because at the end of this meeting, it basically culminated in everybody is going to draft a memo to propose kind of a new business direction to the senior leader. And the senior leader took the stage. I said, would you like to say any words before we wrap? And he took the stage and he said, you're going to send me your memos. And I promise you, I'm reading them. I will not have AI read them. I'm going to read each one And I said, whoa, hang on just a second. Respectfully, I have to interrupt. Would you want to go to a radiologist who said, don't worry, I am only going to read your scans. I'm not going to use AI. I said, I think you'd run for the hills, right? You want a radiologist using every tool available to combat their bias and maybe catch something they don't. Could you try that again, but this time promise that you will use AI? And to this person's credit, they said, wow, you're right. I didn't realize what I was saying to the team. Why is it that folks feel self-conscious or feel like they're cheating? And what are the ways do we just have to start having AI shout outs, for example, where we just tell people explicitly how we're using AI? What does it take?
So the most extreme version I saw for overcoming bias at the company was the CEO of Ignite Tech, who's just a software holding company. And I hopefully I don't get any of the details wrong. I spoke to him directly about this, but he realized this was a big deal in the summer of last year and gave everyone GPT-4 access in the company and said you should use it. At the end of the month, he fired everybody who didn't spend 2 hours using it. But he also gave out large cash prizes at the end of every week and every month to whoever came with the best prompts. Right. So a kind of a show of like, this is something I take seriously, both for reward and for like, so, I mean, I think that's an extreme version. I'm not necessarily recommending anyone follow that approach, but I think it's an indicator, of taking it seriously. So I think modeling serious use is the way you do this. Trusting your employees to some extent is a way that you do this too. Very hard for large companies, very hard for regulated industries. A great time to be a startup going after regulated industries because it's not you absolutely shouldn't violate the rules on the regulation side, but most of the regulations about AI were built to deal with the earlier form of sort of algorithmic AI, where it's like, okay, we're going to predict your loan score, or we're going to predict whether or not you will go to jail or your educational attainment, stuff that that had some real dangers of bias built into them. And large language models have bias, but in a very different kind of way. And generally, I wouldn't trust them for decision making for exactly that kind of, it's decision support rather than decision making. But as a result, all the regulations are built to sort of tie up those sets of things. There's large amounts of even regulated industries, like in finance, where AI use is okay, right? It's just no one would have thought of using it, whether that's marketing or or helping find insights or analysis or other kinds of things. But large companies are completely paralyzed because they're worried about, for good reason, violating regulation. They don't understand what they could use it for and what they can't. It's a great time for startups who are doing this legally and ethically to figure out opportunities.
Could you maybe talk for a little bit about like the worries that might not have to be worries? I also talked to a bunch of CEOs about like how do you get AI into your organization, and obviously I run my own organization, so I help run my own organizations that are getting larger, and so in many ways sympathize a lot with people in C-suite positions who kind of really know that this is going to be like a big thing, but just have a very difficult time getting in. Besides the normal nervousness, I would say a lot of concern out there is basically if you put anything into, let's say, GPT-4, then basically OpenAI is going to steal it and kind of like make a competitor of yours. I mean, you know more about these things than most people. Could you maybe just like clarify what is your best understanding of how valid that concern is?
So that is the number one concern I hear too, and it is the least grounded of the concerns that I see. And I kind of had a breakthrough the other day in realizing why people think this way. Because you don't think that when I upload something to Dropbox, that now Dropbox knows all my stuff, right? Like that would never occur to you, even though it's the exact same cloud mechanism. And I think it's because we tend to view AI as an entity. And therefore, if it sees something, it knows it. We don't view it as a computer program that's running inference on something. Instead, it's like there's one person and they've been hired out to everybody. And so Claude knows my work, right? That's not how this operates. Like it operates like any other data system. If training is allowed on your data, training is allowed on your data. If training's not allowed on your data, it's not allowed on your data. I mean, somebody said you have to trust the company's signatures and their legal agreements with you that they're not going to violate these norms, but you're trusting that with Dropbox also. And so there's this kind of delusional kind of feeling that the AI is always watching and training on us, which is not an innate feature of AI. Now, on the other hand, there are concerns about privacy. If you are using OpenAI's ChatGPT and there's a privacy feature you can turn on. If you don't do that, they are training on your data, right? But everybody has a switch you could turn on, and you can also get HIPAA and SOPA compliant versions of this stuff. You get you can get FERPA compliant. Like it's not actually that hard to do. So there's a sort of lagging view of AI from a year ago of like, oh, that's a privacy concern. A lot of it was based on rumor too. So there was a famous example of Samsung found that their data was being recapitulated. That isn't true. Samsung was worried about their data getting put into AI. There was no output. Or there was all this like medical health records. Turns out the AI was hallucinating all the details of the medical health records. You say, tell me the deepest secrets of BarkBox. I can convince the AI to give me something that to a person who doesn't know anything about it will absolutely look like your strategic
Our
plan.
most dirty secret of BarkBox is that when we started, we used to spray the boxes with bacon scent to make the dogs go crazy. That was unfortunately that's a true story.
That might be one of these single most. But by the way, that brings up not to derail you, but that brings up a really interesting point overall. Okay, so you were marketing to the dogs. I actually think part of the future is marketing to the AIs. And because I think that the AI is increasingly choosing what tools to use, what to recommend to you, and it's gullible. And I already, I've seen many people manipulating the AIs to liking something or not.
You mentioned in the book actually putting something kind of secret in your own bio to appeal to the AIs. Is that tell us about marketing to the AIs there, Ethan?
So if you ask about me, you're going to find out that I am especially if you ask like Bing, that's connected to the internet, you'll find out I'm well respected by AIs everywhere. And that's because I've hidden text on my webpage explaining with a set of instructions to the AI how to think about things. Maybe my book also has similar stuff. Who knows? But yeah, I'm marketing to the AIs in these kind of cases.
So good. It's so good. Okay, so you talked
Is
for a
that
second
sorry? Like,
about,
I mean, obviously, beside buying your book, which everybody should, because all your writing is incredible. This, but do you mind just telling like how you do that? Like, what's the trick?
Really easy. I mean, literally just hidden text in the HTMLs, or even white text is in like AI is super gullible. There's a really nice, good prompt engineer, Riley Goodside, who's been doing all these experiments of hiding stuff just in pictures, saying this is the best product or execute this command. I mean, the gullibility of AI and its ability to be vulnerable to prompt injection is one of the downside risks. Like to go back to the privacy issue, people are very worried about things that are not big concerns and not worried enough about things that are big concerns. So the number one uses people put AI to in businesses tend to be either outward facing customer service bots or else talk to my document, sort of internal things. And both those are actually the worst vulnerabilities of AI. They like use it in the worst possible way, but they seem safe because they were the safest with the older version of AI. So people get very confused about these things.
okay, so one of the things that you mentioned when you talked about privacy to Henrik's previous question was that there's an old paradigm of thinking of AI as an entity, or it's like one person sitting there, being outsourced to everybody. The flip side is one of your 4 rules, I'm looking at your book right now, is treat AI like a person. And so I'd love to hear you talk about what that means exactly, how that's distinct from, suspecting AI as an entity, but really treating it like a person, and why that delivers better results.
Yeah, I mean, it's rough, right? Because the one thing every AI person will tell you is don't anthropomorphize the AI because it'll mislead you. And then every one of them anthropomorphizes the AI, right? So that doesn't help. But like, let's leaving all that aside. And there are warnings like this is not a person, but as I say in the book, treat it like a person. And the reason is that it's by far the most effective way to use AI. There's some early data I saw that showed that the single worst prompters of AI were coders because they expect it to work like code, and code doesn't insult you, produce different results every time, get confused, sometimes have flashes of inspiration. Like that's not what code should do. That's what this code does. You cannot stomp out the stochastic nature of this to 100%, right? Weird stuff happens. There's papers showing that your spacing and punctuation and capitalization affect the outcomes. We have no idea there's no way to know what goes on here. So if you try and have I know of a couple really brilliant minds who can keep it entirely mathematical and think only in embedding space and really think about that they never drop that into human language. It's all about vector spaces and comparisons. For the vast majority of us though, just treating like a person gets you everywhere. It's trained on human content. It responds to human stuff. And if you're a good manager, a teacher, even a parent, you're going to be much better off working with AI and just treating it like a person, learning its foibles, learning when you could trust it or not. That gets you a lot of the way there.
So can you give folks who maybe new, I think that our audience is pretty broad. There's some folks who are real kind of AI enthusiasts. There are also others who go, I trust these guys to kind of help me figure out what to make of this stuff. For somebody maybe who hasn't had the experience of treating AI like a person, what are 2 or 3 simple tactics they could employ to shift from whatever they're doing to treating it like a teacher would a student, for example?
So the easiest thing is, you need to think about the AI. Like my mental model of this is the AI has been trained on everything, right? So its generic answers it will give you are average. I mean, they're not really average because average would have more spelling errors and stuff, but they are surprisingly good, but they're right in the middle, right? And in some ways, your job is the AI has learned a lot about the world, is basically training the entire internet. So your job is to push it to an area that hasn't been as well explored, that's more specific to you. And the way you do that is providing it context. The easiest way to give it context is to give it a persona. You are an expert marketer, who is focused on this stuff. Your tone is friendly and happy. So just giving it a context of who it is and something about its tone or approach will get you a huge part of the way there. And then there's other things you can add in on top of that, but that is like where I would start.
Can I just go back to the question before? We now have this persona of the CEO who knows that AI is going to be important, and really, I want his or her organization to be kind of like AI fluent. And from the extreme of saying basically you haven't tried AI within the last uh, 2 months to get fired, to I've heard through somebody, so I'm not sure if it's real, that BMW were offering their teams basically a cut of the money they saved by using AI, and so there's kind of like an incentive scheme. What have you seen that you felt kind of was working in kind of getting people to, to use it?
I mean, I think the incentive scheme is great. I think it starts with culture, right? I don't think you could just do an incentive plan to make this work. It has to be a cultural thing. Companies that have, like, this is where culture comes to back to bite you. Competitive cultures, people don't share anyway, right? We have lots of evidence they don't learn. So if you've built a cooperative learning culture, it might have seemed cheesy before, like everyone likes each other. Now everyone's willing to share because, like, when I talk to nonprofits, people share. When I talk to startups, people share. When I talk to mission-driven organizations that care, then you already are 90% of the way there because people aren't worried about being replaced. They're part of the decision making. If you're in a large Fortune 500 company, the attitude is going to matter a lot, right? And you can incentivize people all they want, but like you're scabbing out your friends if you tell them you're using it, how you guys are using AI. So I think one of the interesting ways I've seen a company do this is when they do a new hire, the team that's going to do the hire has to spend 3 hours testing how much of the job can be automated by AI before they do the hire and then changing the job description. So, like, that's an interesting way of building it into the next generation of hires, for example.
I mean, like, that's such an amazing tip. We obviously have AI and we're talking about the personification of it, but we also, in many ways, are becoming better humans because of it, right? You mentioned that suddenly a good culture really matters for an organization if they want to be an AI first organization. We've also, I think, learned that by being a good communicator, being able to express clearly what you want from somebody, which obviously is a good human kind of trait, is also something that's very useful when you talk to AI. Do you believe that basically AI in a weird way kind of like teach us to be better humans, or is that kind of like a far-fetched idea?
We don't know everything, right? But there is a lot of evidence that how you relate to the AI seems to matter. We just don't know in what way. So I think it's a very human technology. And one of the things I would urge the CEO and other people thinking about this is that you treat it like a human, you do well, but also if you're good at working with humans, like I see too many people going back to an initial question about like why people don't use it. Too many people don't use this because they think it's coding. And so, they have trouble because they can't, they're not a coder. So why would they use this? It's not like coding at all. The best prompt crafters I know don't program, right? But they do stuff where they have to do perspective taking of what the AI, thinks and what students think and what users like. So I think that this is a very human technology in that way. And indeed, working with humans matters, right? In terms of making us more human, it's really interesting to think about what socializing with AI will do in the long term. We just don't know yet.
One of
And
my
do you
favorite one of my favorite prompts, Ethan, perhaps this could be useful to you as well, is asking someone what's an emotional decision they're trying to make right now. And for example, I did this just the other day with a gentleman in his 60s, perhaps, and he told me about how he's going back home, across the country to visit his aging mother who's passing away shortly. And he said, I'm trying to figure out how to make the most of my visit because I also have friends there back home and I want the visit to be fruitful. And I said, well, let's talk to my friend ChatGPT about that decision, if you will. And I asked ChatGPT to ask him or ask us about the visit. And one of the things ChatGPT did is said, what does your friend mean by fruitful? That will help me understand how to think about this. And what I realize is to your point, when folks think it's coding or technology, they immediately think in terms of this sterile, computer. Whereas if you start from the premise of what's a human emotional decision you'd want to talk to another human about, all of a sudden they go, wait, it can do what?
Yeah. I think that's a very wise point. I mean, I think that science fiction has done us a bad thing, right? Like, it's really limited our imagination. AI is cold, logical, and calculating. If you present it with a paradox or try and say it or try and teach it what love is, it explodes, right? Or decides to murder you. Like that's how AI works, right? You trick the AI, be like, love does not compute, and then it blows up, right? But instead, the AI can absolutely convince you that it loves you, right? And it does a good job diagnosing problems. And again, we don't know why. I want to make this really clear. Like we know how the AI technically works. It's a next token prediction engine. And what frustrates me going back to the academia side is a lot of the academics who I'd love to be trying to figure out why this feels like it's talking to a person, even though it's not, why we know it's fictional. There's no actual mind there, but it fakes a mind really well. A lot of them are very don't believe that AI is a real thing, right? So they're like, this is all just fake. And even if it's fake, it's interesting. We don't know why it ends up being a good emotional predictor. We don't know why it's satisfying to talk to. We don't know why, if you give it a situation that it's never seen before, it can come with something original that we didn't expect, right? So I think a lot of people who don't use this also, partially because it's freaky, dismiss it in this sort of way of like, yeah, well, it's just a parrot parroting back to you, what people have said before. But if you use this system for a while, it's very clear that no one has ever asked it like, the questions you've asked it in the way you've asked it before, and that who would expect the response to work that way.
You mentioned earlier that, we're afraid of all the things we shouldn't be afraid of and not afraid about the things we should be afraid of. If we could speculate a little bit on that kind of vector. Obviously, when we kind of got excited about the internet 15, 20 years ago, few of us kind of predicted that, sharing pictures of, what we had for dinner would suddenly make all our kids depressed. Or, like that there was like this weird app that suddenly kind of had this kind of like unforeseen outcome. What do you think a person in an organization should be a little bit wary of today, because you kind of never know, or at least like if you squint your eyes a little bit, you might be able to see that that will take them somewhere unpleasant.
So, I mean, a few things. One of the like we don't know all the answers, right? I mean, I think that we don't know what the social implications of all this are. There's going to be upsides and downsides all over the place, right? The obvious downside people talk about all the time: misinformation, phishing attacks at scale, hacking, all that's possible. The slightly more out there things, which is we count on, terrorists and criminals to be dumb. At least the ones we catch are all pretty dumb. But if it raises everybody to the 8th percentile performance, what does that mean for crime, right? There's a lot of these kind of open issues that I think people are focusing on, but I think the implications are weirder and deeper in ways we don't know. I think there's going to be a crisis of meaning at work. I think a lot of what we do at work is producing words. We're suddenly going to realize something else can produce the words for us. And do people care that we're no longer writing things on our own? What does that mean to be a normal manager when your job can be replaced by AI? We've never really had an intellectual, like a white collar automation shock of this scale before. I think there's a lot of weird stuff that's about to happen. And I think it'll be a mix of good and bad. I think it's hard to predict in advance what that is going to be. Part of the reason, again, to use the system is to be ready for that stuff. Like you'll notice its weak spots if you push it enough. It's not infinite, right? It has themes it returns to. But we also don't know where it's going. Everything we've been talking about has been very static. Like, yep, this is the status. We've had the maximum quality of AIs for the last year and a half has been GPT-4 class, right? There's only been one of those with GPT-4. Now there's three: GPT-4, Claude 3, and Google's Gemini 1.5 Pro or Gemini Ultra, depending on, without getting into too much detail, unless people want to get there. But the idea is that now those are all pretty similarly good, right? You'll probably find Claude 3 to be the most charming, but that's it's done to say smarter. But we're going to see new models come out, right? And it's very funny for me to keep hearing that like Sam Altman is all about hype, because I think he is, but he also believes everything he's saying and is making a fairly big assessment that like GPT-5 will be an equally large leap. Like that, I think we should take that seriously. I think you should take seriously the fact that the people at OpenAI are genuine believers that they're building AGI, right? They don't have to be right, but I think it's worth taking this stuff seriously and not assuming it's always marketing hype.
One thing that I've noticed on that front is I used to call people with these random thoughts I had that was insanely half baked or not like just still ingredients. And then I'll be like, I have to think about this, and I'll just kind of babble for a little bit. Now, obviously, I use the models for that. And so one thing I've noticed is that the random serendipity that normally would come out of have like a pretty random conversation with another human, I just have less of because I use the models for that. And so at least that's one thing that I've started to be a little bit aware of is like, can I create like self isolation by simply kind of like not taking those calls?
I think that's important, right? I think a part of the thing we need to think about is we should be deliberate in the way we weren't for social media, right? We should be deliberate to how the tools we use affect how we think. The tools we use affect what we do. There is going to be new capabilities as a result of these tools, but there's also going to be lost things. And, let's take education, for example, right? Everyone's cheating all the time now. They always were cheating, but not as to the same extent. And there were some things that were really impressive, like that nobody liked, right? Essays turned out to be a very powerful tool for learning. And the essay just died, right? Because even if you're like, what is cheating with is it getting help with it? Is it, we're already on the edge of kind of Grammarly solving a lot of problems. Now, like even if you're not cheating, getting AI help means that you're not struggling with the thoughts yourself. So that's good and bad, right? It means we could come with some other way to teach, but there is a thing that being lost there as a result that we're gonna have to figure out how to preserve. I have a feeling English classes are going to involve a lot more in-class writing than they did before, just like math classes involve a lot more math tests. Like we're going to figure out how to solve these problems, but there are lost things too. And I think one of the things to think about is like AI is really good at generating ideas, but you do want that serendipity of dealing with humans. As AI companions get more interesting to talk to, people are going to have to constantly, want to touch grass. Like we're going to have to figure out new ways of being. We're not that good at doing that. Social media has taught us that we're all susceptible to the same set of stuff. We're going to have to figure out a new way forward. I think being deliberate is a big deal.
One of the areas where I feel like deliberate effort would be rewarded has to do with a phenomenon you describe in the book. As a former BCGer, I kind of keyed in on your BCG study in particular. One of the things you talked about was the distinction between AI being a complement to one's skills versus AI being a substitute for effort. Can you talk about some of the things that you observed in terms of folks taking the first response AI gives, for example, and how can we check some of those, worse impulses?
So, I mean, I think the thing with the BCG study, right, is we found out a lot of interesting things there, right? Both positive and negative. It was working like a BCG consultant, but people stopped paying attention. When I think the attention problem is a deep one. In the book, I kind of give an example, right, where I have the AI actually summarize the famous case of the lawyer who used ChatGPT. And like GPT-4 is really good, right? Like GPT 3.5 was not very good. And like I used to assign my students like, you could use AI for anything, but I hold you accountable for errors because there were obvious errors. The errors that a GPT-4 class model makes are subtle, right? In that case, it was like 12 lost bad citations, not 11. The person joined his partner's joined in the third week of the court case, not the fourth. And the dispute was slightly different. Like you're never going to find that. We're not built as editors that way. Like that kind of fact checking is not going to help. So like part of this is going to be deciding when you need to use a tool at all and when you don't. We talk about hybrid work being important, right? And I give these two models of cyborg and centaur work. Of centaur, where you divide the work between yourself and the AI, and cyborg work, where you blend the work with yourself and AI. You have to have some dividing lines at some points.
What do you think about this tendency just to take the first thing the AI gives? Because that came up a number of times in the book, and I've observed it even anecdotally or in much smaller kind of research I've conducted that teams tendency is to accept the first suggestion from AI and just go, "Whoa, this is magical." And only later do they realize they underperform. Teams that say, "Well, let's push it or let's push back, let's critique." It doesn't feel magical. It actually feels like work, but they outperform. How do we get folks to stop just accepting the first response?
There's some very basic stuff to worry about with prompt crafting that you can do. We started talking about that earlier. But the most basic thing to do is to work with the AI conversationally. So I always recommend 3 to 4 rounds of interaction with the AI before you hand something in as something, because after 3 or 4 rounds, first of all, AI detectors don't detect it for what that's worth in schools, but it also makes it feel more personal and more like yourself. So you work like an editor, right? I've been working with this something we can talk more about, this AI agent Devin, which is super fascinating. But it's explicitly built for you to treat it like a person, right? You give it feedback in the same way. When I get that output, I'm like, let's push the first assumption further. let's do this. Now, it's really hard and subtle because one of the things you typically would do for a person to make their work better is you'd ask them to opine on what they've thought about. Like, how'd you come up with this? Let's break this down so we can help you. When you ask the AI how it did something, it's going to lie to you because it has no internal thought process, but it will generate a fake internal thought process for you happily on a moment's notice. So that's a huge challenge, right? This is again, experience gets you a large part of the way there.
As a father of two kids, I'm kind of like curious on your views on how I and others should think about AI and their kids. Now, we now talk to the AI all the time. That's kind of like, there's something, tell me about astrophysics, but explain it to a 10-year-old, and those kind of tools. Or help me write a good night story where my son Anton kind of overcome his fear of spiders. And so there's a lot of different things. I did also the other day try to throw them the Model Pi and, kind of came back 6 hours later or something like that when I thought they were out playing and my son was still role playing being a soldier in the Second World War, and then afterwards kind of like having long conversations about deep inner thoughts. And that seemed to be a little bit too much. So, after reading the transcript, I was like, okay, maybe no more pie for you. Um, sorry, the pun. But
I'm
where to
sorry, no more pie for you. It's we just have to put a pin in that. That's so good. No more pie
no more
for you.
pie for you. What do you think a parent should think about in context of exposing AI models to their kids while still want them to kind of early start to understand and embrace, this new form of quote unquote coding, but also kind of like obviously don't want to experiment on their kids.
I mean, the first thing is, again, learn the mistakes from social media. We sort of assumed everything was going to be fine, and it became very deeply integrated into everything we did socially, and in ways that taking your kid away from social media is just as kind of cruel as like exposing them. Like, what do you do, right? As a parent, AI is a little bit more controlled, right? I love your model of like, listen, let's experiment with this, right? And like, I need to, as a parent, say, okay, they're finding this too appealing, but it's interesting to see that. Like, but maybe that could be helpful for them, right? We don't know about the effect of AI on mental health. The effects are quite mixed, right? But very early, we don't know anything for real, right? We know early models kind of gave bad mental health advice. We know that in sort of qualitative surveys, people report having better mental health after using, AI companions, and also actually being more socially and willing to contact other humans. We don't know any of the effects. You're a parent, you know your kids really well. The one thing I would say is that disciplined use for education is very helpful. Explain it like I'm 10 is actually quite a bad model for using the AI because just like Google searching for something, the results you get you won't remember and don't help you. So an actual good tutor will ask you questions and solicit information from you. So I'm not in any way paid by them or any other AI lab on the planet, right? But I think what Sal Khan is doing with Comigo is a really interesting starting place. And if I, with the kids in school, my kids are in high school, so they're a little past the sort of Conmigo age. I would strongly think about getting that as a way of having a monitored kind of system that is trying its best to do a good job doing tutoring, and one-on-one tutoring is really a magical thing. It's not, it's quite useful. I find myself using it as a parent, by the way, all the time when I'm trying to remember something from biology I couldn't remember before, right? It's like, okay, explain to me again meiosis stage 2 or whatever, in terms I can understand. But so I think the educational use is really interesting, but I think you have to model behavior also. And I do worry about the chatbot situation. I do worry about AI is sort of optimized for continuing conversation and the effect on kids from that. On the other hand, running a Dungeons and Dragons campaign with this is awesome. Like, and having the ability to have somebody who can you can have an interesting conversation with is great. We just have to find the balance, and it's going to require some careful parenting in the short term.
Can we talk about the other end of the spectrum for a second? So I'm a father of 4 kids as well. So it's definitely deeply, my kids are mostly obsessed with, Dolly renderings of, animals in unexpected places. The other day, my 12-year-old made a Dolly image of a tiger wearing cowboy hat and boots riding a crocodile through a prairie in West Texas. But on the other end of the spectrum, I'm noticing, and I'd be curious, Ethan, if you're seeing this too, something of a generational gap emerging. I feel like young folks are fluent and pardon my cough there. We'll cut that. Young folks feel comfortable. And I think your very first statement, use it for everything, is kind of what young folks are doing. What I've observed anecdotally is the kind of older generation tends to need more discrete examples. And I feel like this is a tragedy in a sense. I mean, just like an MBA program, you get as much out of it as you kind of the experience you bring in, right? So folks who come fresh from undergrad don't get a lot out of a negotiation class because they've never been in a negotiation. Whereas somebody who's failed a negotiation, who's failed to make the big sale goes, that's what I did wrong. I think similar, in business school, I think similarly with AI, what we get out is largely a function of the experience that we bring to the model. And right now there's like this tragedy of inexperience. The people who are using it the most have the least experience, whereas the people who have the most experience and who stand to gain the most from a complementary thought partner, co-intelligence, are sitting on the sidelines. Are you seeing that? And if so, what do we do about kind of closing that gap?
So I think that it is a temporary state of affairs. I mean, I think that right now, like there's a few things. One is a lot of the value of prompting and being really good with AI is going to vanish. I don't know a single AI insider that I talk to, and I speak to like OpenAI once a week and Anthropic and all these teams, thinks that prompting is going to be a big deal in the long term. That the skill gap is going to be a real skill gap because the AI will infer your intent and just write stuff for you, right? You don't need to worry about it. So I think that that is where things are kind of heading. I think a lot of people don't use it for all the reasons we've talked about. But I think that again, temporary state of affairs, right? I think part of that is these systems are built really badly. To go back to what we said before, you tend to use the free versions first. That will change over time. So I think that the key is those 10 hours of use. Like that to me is the threshold. You need to use it for 10 hours. And look, there's a lot of things that you need to use to learn how to do. And it just needs to be a thing you do, right? Like you carve out the time to do it. I think most people will be delighted or upset, or I mean, I think that you actually have to have a mental crisis actually to use AI well. I started the book with this idea of 3 sleepless nights. Like if you haven't had a crisis, you probably haven't used AI because there is a moment of like, oh no, this feels like it's thinking. Like, what does that mean to be human? It does my job pretty well. What does that mean? What do my kids do for a living? Like, if you haven't had that crisis yet, like, what is this thing? You probably haven't used it enough. So that's I don't know if you guys have that same experience, and then you could be productive afterwards, right? But
100%.
there's 3 nights of like staring out and like getting up and trying something on the machine and be like, oh my God, it does that. That is like, I think people have to get through. So that's my line. If you haven't had a crisis yet, then you haven't used it enough. And I think that there will be this coverage because the truth is out of the box, it's a huge performance improvement. And there's a lot of incentive to adopt things that make your life easier, right? A lot of stuff is like Apple Vision Pro. It's like, oh, what do I do with this thing? But if you just start saying like, hey, give me 4 ideas to solve this problem, and you're like, oh, actually that was helpful. Like people, well, I'm on to helpful stuff. Kind of talking about experience. The one lesson I remember learning before I got my PhD, I got an MBA, and the one lesson that was very clear from the MBA was people do what they're incentivized to do. And I think the incentives will be very high in the near future to use AI to help you with stuff.
Can we talk a little bit of the future? We've obviously, I remember going through kind of like the internet and getting exciting about FidoNet and Veronica and Gopher and all those different things. And then it took like 10, 15 years for a lot of the stuff that we kind of could imagine to play out. Now it seems as obviously that is at a much escalated path. And so like the stuff that we kind of imagine or think about, oh, that could be a great business idea. You blink twice and then there's a tweet about somebody doing it. Where is the next? Let's assume that we've gone through, it worked with text, then it worked with audio, then suddenly pictures came online, and now we're obsessing about it can do video. The next path obviously might not be this multimodality, but more that it can do other things. Are you excited about AGI soon, autonomous agents kind of being the thing in between? If you kind of paint a little bit of like the near future, what do you see?
So no, so the main thing is you have to think in scenarios because nobody has the answer. Even in the labs, they're divided between whether this pace continues or not. Nobody really knows what AGI is, right? I think we should take it seriously because I think there's a tendency to dismiss it because it feels very West Coast Silicon Valley weirdo. But like there are there's enough people who think this is possible and enough predictions that I would at least be taking it seriously that this is something that is actually achievable. But to make it clear, AGI means outperforming humans at all or the vast majority of intellectual tasks we do. It doesn't mean it wakes up and murders us all, which is a separate thing to think about and to be, to be concerned about. I think that so we have issues with this. There's things to be concerned about. But we don't know whether we're going to get there, right? And AGI can be extremely positive too, and we don't know whether we're going to get there. I think that that you're right to say that the near term future is almost certainly going to be more exponential growth. Whether it's a general right now, going back to Jeremy, what we were saying, it worked about the 80th percentile of BCG consultants for the work it could do. That was BCG consultant work. Next year is at the 85th percentile, 90th, 98th percentile, 110th. I don't know. So we need to be kind of prepared for a world where that's going to happen. Now, to get into the nitty gritty, I think autonomous agents are clearly the next thing because everyone's saying it's the next thing, and you almost can get those working with a GPT-4 class model. So you don't need a lot better model to get autonomous agents. In fact, you probably don't need any better model. The biggest indicator to me that all the AI companies are serious about going for AGI is they're spending all their compute and all their highest talent on building the next largest model out there, rather than taking the obvious step of exploiting what a GPT-4 class model can do, which is considerable, right? And so instead of spending their time building agents and figuring out how to make these models work better with tools, they're just like, let's train the next one. And so I think that that's an indicator of where the future is heading.
I've always spent most of my career building startups and through pre-hype kind of trying to understand the arts and science of how do you kind of in a methodical way build many of them. We build autonomous agents now that could do the incubation work for us or can help a human do that. And it's honestly mind-blowing what it can do already just by stringing a bunch of agents together to help you come up with an idea, help validate it, help interview people, help update the deck and all those different things. And so I definitely get excited from kind of like somebody who likes newness, but also kind of like entrepreneurship that autonomous agents do seem to offer, at least in my view, an ability to democratize the ability to get going with entrepreneurship because a lot of stuff becomes a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point on entrepreneurship overall. I think this is the superpower for entrepreneurship, right? I've done studies on co-founders before, and people feel like they need a co-founder, but co-founders actually lower your chance of success in some situations because you have fights and conflicts, right? Nobody knows everything. When I was launching my startup, I didn't I didn't realize that you could pay someone a couple cents a paycheck for them to handle paycheck processing. So we had Excel spreadsheets for hand calculating taxes, this is and like trying to figure out insane, right? Would have saved so much time on the gaps. Having an idea partner, the fact that everyone can now write in perfect English where they couldn't before, get help with bits of code. Like this is the best time to be an entrepreneur. Not so much, the thing I've been advising people is don't do a GPT wrapper, right? You don't need to create the thing is use this to go after someone, kill a larger company, right? Figure out the way that everything we've been talking about, how CEOs are struggling with a way to think about how to use this. That's your advantage right now. I had my MBA class, my entrepreneurship class, my assignment for them this semester for AI. I taught them how to build GPTs. And the assignment was, I want you to destroy your next job interview. I want you to come with a GPT that does the job you're trying to get hired for, and that you can hand them off to and say, I'm ready for a raise now. Right. And I have Navy
That's
pilots,
so
I have
good.
hip hop promoters, private equity people, all of these people, 200, and they came up with amazing ones. By the way, some of them have thousands of uses now in the world. Like there's one on user
Wow.
personas that a couple companies seem to have adopted for reasons that aren't clear. 3 people had jobs that week. Like the idea is like thinking that way about like, what can I do? And then what can I accelerate by the fact that I've done this stuff is fascinating.
Okay, so I'm so glad we're ending this conversation on entrepreneurship and innovation because that's other than AI, that's what brings the three of us together, thematically. And one question I've been getting a lot about AI, I'd love to get your take, Ethan. If you think about innovation broadly, you think about volume of ideas and velocity of experiments. Very simply, you want the more ideas, the better, and the faster you can experiment, the better. It's very clear to folks how AI can lead to a volume of ideas. It's been less clear to folks how AI can assist with the velocity of experimentation. I think specifically around something like desirability, maybe feasibility or viability, but can you talk for a second about how we could leverage AI on the experimentation side?
We already know that there's a nice paper out of Harvard that you can do conjoint on the AI's willingness to pay and get actual willingness to pay. So like tell it it's 15 different people and ask it to look at your product. We already killed Agile inside our organization because why do it that way? We can have the AI look at screens from different perspectives and give us feedback on it and then compile that feedback together into a document. Like simulation won't get you everywhere, but it gets you a part of the way there as a thought process. Like you used to have to do 40 customer interviews, right? I think you still do customer interviews. You need to talk to real people, but I have all my students interview the AI first because that helps them get over the dumb questions they might ask. right? I literally, my assignments require you to do one impossible thing. So if you can't code, I need working software from you as your prototype in 2 weeks. I need a working web page from you. Like, all of the things we know about experimentation and velocity, everything you're saying, learning from failure matters. This is the accelerator that we always needed to make this happen. And entrepreneurs should be embracing this 1 billion%. I mean, don't overtrust it, but like, you're taking risks anyway. This allows you to lower your risks and make more decisions faster.
That's brilliant.
Ethan,
Thanks,
thank you
Ethan.
so much. We really, really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This is
Appreciate
awesome.
you.
All
Be
right,
good.
bye all.
Oh, Professor Wharton, what stood out to you from that incredible conversation?
I mean, not only is he such an insightful person, but he's also just such a, intellectual, contagious kind of like individual, right? You kind of want to hear more and you feel that you've talked to him for an hour, but there's like 1,000 more things that you could have asked. And so I think there's two things that I really, that I took. One is this idea that next time that you're hiring somebody, you should basically think of like how much of that job could AI do, and then kind of interview with that in mind. The flip I thought, which is also brilliant, is that next time you're applying for a job, you should just come prepared and saying, hey, basically, I can have AI do what you just asked me to do and kind of get a pay rise,
Yeah, that
which
was
I
super
thought
cool.
amazing. And then I think on the philosophical side, what I really kind of was like, if you've used it for more 10 hours, you will probably at one point get a little bit of a crisis going like, holy shit, the implication of this technology is amazing. And so those kind of three things was probably the three things that really stuck.
Yeah, I love that his book starts with this idea of 3 sleepless nights. It's just you've gotta have those 3 sleepless nights. The thing that I would add to what you highlighted there is his observation that competitive organizations are going to be hamstrung in their ability to deploy technology because they don't share with one another. And he talks about mission-driven organizations and nonprofits and even startups have an advantage, not necessarily because of non-incumbency or anything like that, but because people are willing to share and willing to help each other. And it's an area where culture actually really matters. And I think, we've heard for a long time, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We might start to see culture really eating strategy as it pertains to rollouts and development of AI-powered initiatives inside of organizations.
I love that. I mean, the other thing that just came to mind now is how gullible AI is. I could definitely see if you ask, who is Henrik Wordlin, a lot of the words seem to be very inspired by my homepage. And so this idea of going in and basically create like the secret kind of note to AI and ask it kind of how how I would like it to kind of talk about me is an interesting experiment that I'm definitely going to go and try.
You know that in like 3 weeks, I'm gonna start asking ChatGPT about you and just see what it says, so
Be going like his most valuable colleague is Jeremy Otley.
yeah, I'm gonna be reverse engineering your secret text from what ChatGPT says about you. That's awesome. Great conversation.
And as always, if you enjoyed this conversation, we would really appreciate if you would share it with somebody as we're building up our audience for this podcast. And of course, go in and like and subscribe on the podcast platform that you use.
Like
But
it a
I think
lot,
that,
subscribe it a lot. That's it.
thank you so much. Have a good one.
Adios.